Well. So, a couple of months ago, my eldest here, Willa, say hello, Willa. Great hello. She's like, Dad, what do you want for Father's Day? And I was like, you know what I really want for Father's Day? I want to sing a song with you. She goes, really? And I'm like, yeah. She goes, but you can't sing. I was like, but you can. And she goes, do you reckon we can do it on stage? And I was like, well, I do know a guy who could probably make it happen. And one thing led to another, and we're here. So, Will, what do you have to say to all the dads out there?
Happy Father's Day to all the dads.
See if, you ready? Boom. You've got a friend in me. You've got a friend in me. When the road looks rough ahead and you're miles from your nice warm bed, just remember what your old dad said. Hey, you've got a friend in me. Girl, you've got a friend in me.
Troubles, I got them too. There isn't anything I wouldn't do for you. We stick together and sing it through. Hey, you got a friend in me. Hey, friend in me.
Some other folks may be a little bit smarter than I am, bigger and stronger too, but none of them could ever love you the way I do. Just me and you, girl.
As the years go by, our friendship will never die. You come to see it's our destiny. You got a friend in me.
You've got a friend in me. Hey, you've got a friend in
me.
I love it. So again, massive welcome. This is your first time here. If you're watching along online, if you're never normally in church somehow, maybe you got coaxed into coming today because your dad, or your dad goes to church and he's like, and you're like, what do you want for Father's Day? And he's like, come to church or watch along, wherever, however you came here. It's great to have you joining Suncoast for the first time. And to all the dads of Suncoast, again, we love you. And whether you're a biological father or you're a father figure, someone who's stepped into people's lives, we love and appreciate you. Thank you for making the world awesome like you too. When I first became a dad, there was obviously had all the normal bits of advice that people give you. You know, oh, you're not going to sleep, and you know, you get ready for nappies and all that stuff. And you know, I was having a daughter, and everyone's like, oh, you got to buy a shotgun. You know, there's all that stuff. Well, I had that anyways. Yeah, Queenslander. But then there's a whole lot of stuff that I wasn't told, because it's not just about having a child. There's a lot of just change that happened in life. And Joe's one of our pastors, and I'll introduce you to our panel in a second. We were chatting about some of this stuff, and she's like brought up, yeah, no, that's like for lots of seasons of life, it's about being in the turn when there's changes, and it's often when we're in the turns, in a transition from one season to another, that can be very, very complicated. And I was like, we should talk about that. And so that's what brought us here today for Father's Day. We're going to be talking about the different transitions and seasons in life, and maybe some wisdom we can learn along the way. And of course, there's a whole lot that certainly our faith in God has taught us about how to navigate different seasons of life. So with me, I will introduce our panel and we'll jump straight in. Most of these people, actually probably no one needs really that much introduction to probably most people. I'm right here, Dr. Alison Willis, who's one of our communicators and elders and pastoral team and all-around legend and mother, and can come up with a whole lot of other titles. But thank you for joining us. This is Joe, one of our pastors on staff, mother, wife, netball pro, and pardon? Yeah, netball.
Ex, yeah.
Well, you never know. And this is my dad.
Get a friend in me, mate.
Otherwise known as Chazgullo.
Thank you, Alison. Definitely got my singing skills from you, Dad. All right, so Joe, because I think this was your idea in the first place, maybe a little insight, a bit of thought about what is it about changes that happen in and around our different seasons in life that we transition through that has taken you most by surprise, and some of the stuff that stood out to you?
That's a good question, good place to start. Well, I think if you're living and breathing, the best parts, hardest parts of life are going to be in those seasons of change and transition. And whether you're doing life completely alone or with the best community in the world, you're still going to face changes. Whether you're getting married, becoming a parent, whether you're going through grief and loss, whatever that looks like, you're still, even losing your health, there's lots of change throughout life. If you're alive, there's no avoiding change and transition. So I think, yeah, for us, we've had a fair bit of transition, from obviously getting married, parents, moving around the country a few times. There's some stuff that I think the thing that's probably caught me most by surprise is there's some stuff that you can prepare for. There's other stuff that just happens, and you never kind of know which one that's going to be. And there's change that you can really prepare for, but it doesn't stop you from having to walk it out. You still have to take that turn. Even if you know exactly what that map's going to look like, you still have to take that turn, and there's not really, how that looks when it's happening can be very different to what you expect.
I think that can be sometimes the most shocking part of seasonal change in life is, as you mentioned, you can prepare all you want for things. They're just stuff that's going to be outside of our control, and that's beyond our ability to take care of. And for those of us, I think that are like to control and like to prepare for anything, that can really throw people off their game, change it again, Father's Day, so we'll probably lean into a bit today, but parenting, you've got maybe an ideal, this is what the change is going to be, and then things aren't, you can't control another human being, Right.
You can't control another human being, but you can control your reaction to the situation. And I know that sounds very cliched, and there's probably memes out there about that.
Yeah.
but it's actually a truth, because change is inevitable, curveballs are inevitable, and what we don't want to be is knocked off track. I think, though, an important thing about transition is making sure that you do slow down for the corners, that you give yourself time, take your foot off the accelerator, put your foot on the brake a little bit maybe, and take the turn, and then end up with a new direction. And hopefully that direction is healthy, because there's some risks. And I feel, Chaz, you've probably seen a lot of people take a lot of risks. And some things turn out really well and other things don't, both, because you've probably navigated more changes and seasonal transitions than...
Yes, I have.
Yes.
And, I thank God for his wisdom and his word to help me through these places. But I remember one of the hardest ones was when we first came to the Sunshine Coast from Narra. There were 7 members of the family. 6 of us were so excited about coming up here, but one went through the worst grief for 2 years of the transition.
Yeah, I remember
First,
that.
I thought that the Sunshine Coast was horrible. The girls weren't pretty enough. The school was bad.
Terrible
the church
place
was
to live.
horrible.
Yeah.
I hated every moment until I brought him down there after 2 years, and then he found out that it was wrong. But he got out of that after 2 years. But 2 years of a hard time.
And that's absolutely, and because your brain, every time you encounter a new change, or sometimes it's a grief, sometimes it's not necessarily, it might be a good thing, but when a major thing happens in your life, your brain has to reprocess your history in light of the new event. And so because you have to reprocess all those memories, so in the case of your son, all those memories from living in New South Wales, all of a sudden he has a Queensland experience, and it's kind of like he's got to reprocess all of those in light of new information. Wow. It's the same when people lose a loved one, or lose a relationship, or transition to a new country, or whatever it might be. That the emotional toll that can take on your life is significant and shouldn't be underestimated, having to reprocess everything, whether it's positive or negative.
And I think that's tricky too, of you very rarely take a turn alone, and you might take it well, but the person next to you,
So true.
you know, that could be much harder for them. Like in the case of grief, like there's no rhyme or reason for grief. Like for some people it can be not a quick process, but they seem to come out the other end of it faster. But for somebody else, losing the same person or losing the same whatever, that can be a much, much longer process. Like there's no, like we're not doing any of these changes alone, and just being conscious and aware of how other people are taking how other people are taking the turn as well as yourself, or whether or not you've taken it well. Maybe somebody has taken it really well. You've moved,
Yeah.
and they've settled in straight away, and you're that person who's a year into 2 years, and you're like, what's wrong? Why am I still feeling like this?
Yeah. Where some people just kind of like do a quick pivot. The other people are like kind of at the end of it, and they're going flying through the air, you know, and it's just like, yeah. So it's completely different.
It's like taking a corner very quickly in a car. On the steering wheel, you're holding on right, but the poor passengers get thrown around.
Yeah, that's right.
Because we don't realise
the driver knows what's happening.
As you haven't? Well, we have. And but reality, as you said, when you come to a corner, we need to take that corner more carefully. But obviously, some people don't, and other passengers get hurt.
I think
when you've gone out the window and ended up in the ditch.
I can tell you a story about that too.
Well, no, it's true. Funny enough, I remember you when we were younger, and you would have our motorbike in our backyard, and you know, you took me for doubles on the back of it, and you'd always say, "Hey, when we're turning, turn with me," you know, because if you're leaning against me when we're getting the turn, the whole thing's going to fall over. Yes. I think this is where we're referring to the complicated matters, where we all deal with changes in life differently. And when you're rarely doing it alone, there's often someone along with you, and learning how to turn together, it's complicated, you know?
And isolation, which normally happens when people go out of that place of feeling safe or not sure what's happening, they isolate themselves, and that's another worst thing that could happen to them. They need to get back into community, find community, and people who are mature, they see the isolated one and draw them into community, because in community, they feel safer. Isolation, they grow weird.
Yeah, what is it about that though?
Yeah.
Isn't it like there's an old
What voices you're listening to? You're listening to the wrong voices. No one's holding you accountable, and no one's loving you through it. So it's actually, don't be isolated. He who isolates himself seeks his own counsel, and your own counsel can often be the worst.
Somebody's probably got a better map, I think, too, you know, like using that
So
same
true.
analogy, like you can be busting through the bush, getting scraped up, and there's somebody next to you that's like, hey, just over here, like there's a better
easier,
road, there's an
yeah.
easier road, there's another way.
Dad, in your years, I mean, you've been pastoring people for decades and decades. What would be some of the common mistakes that you've seen what we tend to make as people when it comes to different transitions of life? Some common mistakes.
Common mistakes. Usually go into second relationships or from a divorce into a marriage quickly. That's a very common mistake in not getting good advice on the way through. That's very painful for situation for many of the families associated with that. Another one is people earning money quickly, after going from a student living on bread and rice and jumping to a big wage, and all of a sudden just learning to buy big cars, big houses and everything, and going broke because they haven't thought through the process.
Wow.
And another one would have to be the journey of realizing they haven't brought mentors into their life. We can be instructed by people, but a mentor is someone who keeps an eye on you, maybe just tweak you a little bit here, and accepting those mentors in life. And I found that people, all ages, all genders, who would say, once I have mentors, I navigate safely my future, because someone's already been there and they give me some advice. And usually, it shows you with God's word, and they'll lead them through.
Why do you think that's so common? Like, why do you think it's not a natural proclivity for people to seek out mentorship during transitions? Have you seen any common denominators there why people haven't had mentors in their life?
Usually associated with a family situation. They've been isolated in a family. They've come through a painful family breakup. Parents have been broken up, whatever, and they've got isolated out there and having to fend for themselves through all the stages of life, and they become independent, but independence makes them vulnerable in the isolated situation.
So what would you say to someone here today? They're in a transition and they might be recognizing, I'm isolated, I found myself alone. How would they go about engaging some mentorship, some help? What would be advice you'd give to someone that's like that right now?
For the person going through it,
Yeah.
they usually find it very hard. I'd rather see people who know about people like that breaking into their world by asking really good questions to draw them out of that situation. So I look at it from another point of view. My response is I can see people who are going through those isolated areas and just knocking on their door and seeing if they're okay, and then hopefully walking them out of that. If you are going through that, I'll let you know there's so much help out there. This community is great for that. There's many communities, many resources in our government, many resources by the Word of God, and getting good advice from people who have been successful in those areas. So you have to break out, but isolation is horrible because you're just locked in there. Someone has to pull them out.
And often you don't know you're isolated until you are, until you're in a situation when you realise, oh my God, I don't have friends I can turn to right now, or I don't have a community, and so you're right. So when you're in that situation, it's super hard for that person. So I suppose it's the responsibility is on the community around to constantly be sending the text message, checking, pray and text, check in how people are, just, hey, hope you're okay, heard you had a rough week, and don't pull back on that kind of generous encouragement.
Parents can see this often with their children. They're transitioning from childhood to teenagers, and the child becomes a bit different, and we say, well, the child needs help, they can come and see me. But no, I think parents realise we are the adult. We go in there and say, hey, let's walk you through this. And we don't want to see them navigate those areas. I call it lost in space. Kids get lost in space somewhere. And we reach out, bring them back, and just with tremendous support, being patient, and talking to them about their future, and that we can actually make them feel safe. When children, young adults, young teenagers feel safe with parents, when they feel safe in the community, they'll actually begin to grow.
I'm just trying to think if I'm still lost in space. But
You got found a long time ago,
Okay,
mate, you're
that's
right. When COVID got you, it was okay.
If you're in that space of kind of feeling like you're not in community, I think there's probably two things. Like, you make friends, you don't find them. Like, it actually takes a lot of time. I think even in like doing big moves, I always said that I felt like it took about 2 years before I felt like something was like my community. Like you really need to make intentional efforts. If you're finding that hard, I suppose identifying why it's hard, like if you've taken a turn and it was like a bad decision, there might be some shame there. There might be there's usually some reason why you're finding it hard to be like, okay, I need good people around me. Sometimes just asking somebody, getting a good voice and just being like, why am I finding this hard? Like, sometimes that's the first step of like, why is this hard?
that's great, Joe. There's a mentor in my life who, when Chloe and I first became parents, this couple, they're in a church and they're awesome people. We readily went to them and they were just, giving us great pieces of advice, preparing us for parenthood. But then at the same time, they were going through becoming empty nesters. So all their kids had just left home. And I remember talking to him, and we'd been going to him and them both as a couple for so long for help for us. And all of a sudden they were like, no one had talked to us about getting ready for empty nesting. Like, we've been so busy helping others become parents, and now our kids are moving on. So it's like no one talked to us. So I guess my next question is, what's something, and this can be to anyone, what's something that you wish you were told that maybe you were never told before you went into a season of life? What's something you wish someone had told you, and that it might have been awkward to tell you, or it just might be something that most people just don't talk about, but after going through a different seasonal change, what would be something you went, man, I wish someone sat me down and talked about this?
I just wish that I had known the things I know now, especially when my poor wife became pregnant and had a child, and I expected her to still type up my thesis for my master's degree, look after the baby, feed me, and be a wife to me. I didn't know there's a change.
In a foreign country. In a foreign country.
In a foreign country.
You're in London.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I expect to do that quite easily because she's quite a capable girl, but I had to stay studying. She understood where I was going, but she had all those things and want support from me. So I want to apologise, darling. I still love you. Thanks for loving me still.
That you got to take people with you. You take people with you. You slow down for the. I wish I knew back, decades ago, that everything was going to count in the future. I wish that I knew that. I wish that, because I think you stress and you fret and you're like, oh, I hope everything's going to turn out all right, and I hope, and you work this job and then you change tact. Go to uni, and then for me, I changed degree and went to 3 universities before I finally graduated, and some people think I'm still studying, and you just kind of like, you think, oh no, that was a dead end, or that was a dead end. And then you finally get to an age where you go, it actually is all counted for good. And I kind of wish that I knew that back then, so I wouldn't unduly worry and sweat the little things, you know what I mean? And just keep walking, just keep going, keep seeking advice. And, you know, even having a conversation with a friend last night, you know, even if you do, obviously we promote good decision making around here, you know, it saves you a lot of pain. But even if you make a decision and it wasn't a good decision, there's always a way back. You know, there's always redemption, and that's the amazing story about the gospel, about the message of Jesus, is that there is always a second, a third, a fourth, a fifth chance. You know, there is always a way back, and God is an expert in making beauty out of ashes. You know, Joe was talking about shame, and he's an expert at turning, you know, mourning and grief into joy. And that's what I wish I knew when I was younger.
Joe.
That was loud. Sorry. I think I wish that, like, you have permission to feel. That sounds weird, I suppose.
No.
But, like, you know, you can know exactly what the road's going to look like, but there might still be some steps along that path that you feel deeply, and that's okay. You can, I mean, even, like, your kid might get a crazy diagnosis, you know, and you might I know exactly what this looks like. That's still going to be upsetting, and that's okay.
And it's better to process it now than to process it in 20 years' time.
And you will process it. That's the thing. Like, there's no escaping processing it. Whether you process it today healthily or tomorrow angrily, you are going to process it. There's no escaping it.
Go into that a little bit. What do you mean?
Well, I think any situation change, all of it that you're in, like, you can process it healthily in community, through conversation, through, like, healthy self-examination, through prayer, through silence, through solitude, all of those, like, healthy things. If you like, shove that down because you're like, I shouldn't feel like this, or this should be easier, or this should look like X, Y, or Z, in a week's time, that's going to come out. Like, that might come out with your kid, it might come out with your spouse, it might come out with your road rage. You can't, you can't escape processing the things. And you'll either do it healthily or you'll do it unhealthily, but you'll still do it.
Otherwise your body has to, you bury it in your body, and you, until it turns into bitterness, or it turns into, you know.
Which is even Chris and I talk about how much is, like, trapped in the word tired. Like, you ask somebody how they're doing, I'm just really tired. And you're like, that can represent a lot for people. You know, that could be depression, that could be unresolved grief, that could be you just really not looking after yourself in the most basic ways. You're not sleeping, you're not eating, you know, like, but there's so much wrapped up in, like, I'm tired. So that's, like, actually having that, like, I'm going to examine myself. How am I doing?
I love the way you said your solitude, and you talk about solitude, but not by yourself, you're with God in that solitude. Other people get isolated and not have God or anything, and they're just in their own little world, and that's where the pain really goes weird.
I think that's the thing, like, all of us will navigate whatever change of season you're in uniquely, right? And so you will do it in solitude, but you don't have to do it isolated. I remember that was something I wish someone told me. I remember when I went through different changes in my life. In fact, I remember a big one for me was when I bought my first house. And no one told me that you will feel a weight of responsibility having a mortgage on your shoulders. And no one told me.
Rates and electricity.
Yeah.
And
no one told me that. Well, or you told me, you said, you know what mortgage means, son, in Latin? I'm like, no, Dad, what does mortgage mean in Latin?
Latin
Slipped
lessons.
into a counselling session.
I'm like, that's great, Dad, death grip. That really helps me. But you're right. But see, no, and so what I found was, like, I was going through my own journey of learning to take it. I was, like, in my early 20s. I was a single guy at the time. And I didn't know, like, I was experiencing, like, panic attacks, and I was completely isolated because I had no words for this. And I realized I'm isolated here. It wasn't until I started talking to someone, I go, I'm feeling this. There's actually a guy sitting there, and Pete, going, oh yeah, that's normal. As soon as you got, like, a mortgage and hundreds of thousands of dollars you had, everyone feels like that. And I was like, oh, I'm glad I talked about it. And it took that. So I wish Pete had talked to me sooner. Thanks, Pete. Okay, we're getting there. You guys are doing awesome, by the way. Aren't they doing great? Pros. So far. What are some things that no one tells you about dealing with loss? Any kind of loss. What are the things that no one tells you for whatever reason?
I think one of the things that no one says is that you're going to live with it for the rest of your life. A lot of people say you'll get through it, you'll go through the stages of grieving, and people talk about processes. And I think in the West, we really want to, well, let's hurry that up. Let's process it so that I can get on to whatever.
Which is a control thing, hey?
Yeah, it really is, because you want to get back in control of your life, but in non-Western societies, there's a lot more space for grief and loss, and it allows that processing, emotional, social, physiological processing of loss. But also, what people don't say is that you're going to live with this for the rest of your life now. Like, this is part of your story, and so it's important how you write that story. It's important how you do process and how you do navigate and what counsel you do seek and where you do go, so that you don't isolate yourself and end up weird with your own thoughts and counselling yourself, which should be an indicator of, hang on a minute,
Wow.
So we get to choose how we write the story, but we don't always get to choose the story that we write. And I think that's probably something that I've realised now.
Say that again.
Yeah, we get to choose how we write the story, even though we don't always get to choose the story that we write.
Can I say that's actually totally correct?
Phew. I thought you were about to, this could have made it real juicy.
But now I want to go to how Scripture and the Lord actually helps us through that, because we can't change that thing that happened to us. But we have a wonderful gift from heaven called forgiveness. And then the second gift from heaven is called the Scripture, which tells us what to do.
Yeah.
And we see now that the old man, the person that it happened to, I can't change, but I live in a new spirit called the new man. And I must see that old man through God's eyes, the new man. And when I can actually do that transition, I can actually navigate all that pain that took place when I see through how God sees it. Because this new man hasn't been touched by that. The old man, the pain, the disappointment, the divorces, the loss of children, and my gosh, that pain is just, I don't even want to pretend. I know how that feels. But all the things that happen to people's lives are so messy. And yet all I can say that God understands, but he wants to let you see it from his eyes, where he's there to support us. And so we put on that new man, as Christ says, we can actually live that through and see, hey, God's walking me through this. I can never fix that old man up, but I can actually live from a new man, a new person.
That's
in
right.
Christ.
That's right. And yeah. And that was the message that Jesus went around Israel talking about 2,000 years ago. He kept saying to people, things like, I'm giving you an opportunity to be born again, so that your old life can be grieved and be put to death, and that you can have a new life. And that's what, when John was baptizing and Jesus went and got baptized, that's what that was symbolic of the old man dying and the new person being raised to life. And that is the hope that we have in Jesus Christ, that he actually does give us a new life. And it's no longer I who live, but it's Christ who lives in me. And the life that I now live is a hope that God will be glorified.
And I think in a practical sense too, that decision can be a one-off thing, but it might be a decision you've got to make every day.
100%, like you
Or
work out your
every
salvation.
Minute.
Yeah.
That you're like, I'm back where I started, I need to go, remaking that decision. There's no rhyme or reason to how often that you need to actively step into that.
Wow.
I was going to say, I know in my own life and in my friends, I know they often get a list of scriptures, so they develop habits and routines to remind themselves about who they are, who they've been made by God, how God sees them, rather than how the past might want to define them. And so, they have a list of scriptures that they read through every day, or a prayer that they pray every day. You might be like, oh, that's a little bit ritualistic. It's mindfulness for some people. It's a reminder for others.
Healthy habits.
It's keystone habits for people. It just helps people just reframe, like you were talking about, reframe those experiences in light of what God's done for you.
And I think whether you're Christian or not, like temptation's something we all get. And I think like temptation preys upon the rhythms of your life. And if you don't have those like keystone habits that you're like, you know, regardless of the season, I'm working on my marriage. You know, like when that turn happens, when that change happens, the things that were temptations to you in the past might not be anymore, but you might have some new ones. That if you're not like, if you don't have eyes on the prize of those keystone things, your life can like, you can go off the rails pretty quickly. Like all of us are like one small stupid decision away from
Dysfunction.
Yeah, 100%.
I love what you said there, that the enemy or temptation preys on every opportunity in your life, every transition. Even though it's a good one, he says, where can I get in here and find a gap and bring temptation
And whether that's
in?
a daily thing,
Pride,
whether that's the your hormonal systems or your big life changes, like those rhythms.
But if we come out of the God factor in us, that new person in us, we can actually, the enemy's come up. Because Jesus says, the enemy's come to find something in me, but he couldn't find anything. And we must be able to close those doors all the time, the way we do life. That's very real.
God, that's awesome. Super helpful. Last question and final thoughts. What would you say, and again, it's kind of broad, but what are some indicators for yourself and maybe for other people that might show that you're either dealing with the transition well? So what's the indicators? So yeah, I'm dealing with this well. Or what are some indicators maybe that's like a warning sign saying, hang on, you're not dealing with this change well? What would you say in your own life or things you've seen in others' life are indicators? I
feel like weirdly I've discovered that I've got this indicator of like when a transition's about to happen. Like Chris and I have talked about this. Like I have this like discontent that like I just get edgy, and then that's often like an indicator for me that I'm like, oh, I need to press into some important things here because things might be about to there's a turn coming and I need to prepare. And then once I'm in it, for me, it's very much like measuring that, you know, like I'm usually a pretty steady person, but if I'm emotionally doing this, for me, I'm like, okay, something's off. I need to draw back in and, you know, find some good people that I can just like work out what's going on and what's going on in me that I'm obviously not identifying.
So instead of concluding, oh, I'm emotional, I'm crazy, you're going, oh, I'm emotional, maybe this change is happening right now that I'm not processing 100%. That's brilliant. Look at you go.
Very
Thanks,
good.
boss.
My wife had an amazing mentor in Nara, and she was a social worker, and she encouraged us how to have closure when we left that city and that church and came up here. And she said, if you do your closures well and say goodbyes well, you'll be able to say hello really well. And one of the indicators we found was you got space and margins in your life to make new friends. But if your life is cluttered with all the pains, the disappointments, and the sorrows and the griefs, you haven't got any margins of energy or even time to be able to embrace new friends. And so when you come up, after you had all the closures, the good ones and the not so good ones, they're closed. Now I'm open, the new ones. So one of the KPIs is, am I making new friends? Am I able to go and greet someone in the church and see someone strange and say, hello, how you going? And just be genuinely interested in their life. And that
indicator.
margin makes me realize that, hey, God, you'll let that new man come through, all that past, all the good things, and the not so good things I want to leave behind, I can leave behind, and live in a new life. And those things bring forth wonderful life and freedom. So I remember when my last son, Cameron, left home. He left that night. We got up the next morning. We sat across a breakfast table, and I said to my wife, darling, I'm glad I still like you. And so life went on. So away we went.
Because it was really quiet. If I'm completely honest, one of the indicators where I know that I'm not coping very well is when I think I am. So if I know that I'm under the pump and everything's going, you know, I know that there's a lot going on, and then I have that little tiny thought that goes, man, Alison, you're going well. That's probably an indication that I'm probably not about to. And so I know now, after having experienced that multiple times.
Why does that indicate?
I don't know, it's like this overinflated sense of confidence that I could be actually about to crack. And then I probably am inevitably going to. And so I should probably wind back. So any kind of sense of, oh my gosh, this is a lot, but man, you're great, is a really big indicator for me that I'm probably not. And I need to probably, you know, just put my feet on the ground and find some margin.
Guys, thank you so much. That was just absolutely helpful. Can we appreciate our panel this morning? Thank you, guys. life just is complicated, and I think that's okay for us to recognize and realize and acknowledge, because we change, you change. You're probably not the same person you were 12 months ago, 2 years ago. Hopefully not the same person you were 2 decades ago. We mature, right? We grow and we develop and we evolve and we progress. And I think that's important. In fact, one of my favorite verses that I pray over my children every night talks about how that Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and favor with God and man. So even Jesus himself grew and had space and grace to grow in his own life. And so to land this today, I guess I just want to finish with one thought about where you and I get our identity from. I want to talk about our identity, your identity. When I first became a dad, it's like, this is my new identity now. I'm not just Jono, the married guy, or I'm a dad, you know? And so in whatever maybe transition you've gone into a new season of life, I think it's interesting how we can be tempted, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but there's a temptation there to let the season you've gone into be what identifies you, that you identify yourself by your season you're in. But again, seasons change, and we change. And I think there could be a trap that if we let our identity be shaped by a particular season rather than by something bigger or deeper than that. And I learned about this when I was younger, funnily enough, with my dad. I was kind of in the early stages of puberty, let's just say that, and I was beating up my little brother, and Dad came and broke it up, and he pulled me aside and sat me down on the bed to have a man-to-man. And at that moment, he gave me the talk. You guys know what the talk is? Well, let me explain what the talk is. You know, the birds and the bees. And I was like, here we go. And like, I was freaking out because I thought I'm about to get in so much trouble. I've just like assaulted my younger brother. But I was surprisingly met with grace and understanding and like eye-to-eye conversation. I was like, oh, I wasn't expecting that. I was expecting a reprimand. I certainly deserved it. My dad started talking about, you know, you're changing now. You're probably feeling new emotions and you get angry quicker. And I'm like, yeah, I do actually. And he just acknowledged that, yeah, change is inevitable. You're changing. In fact, this shows that you're healthy, you're growing, you're maturing. And it caused me to consider then how I navigated that season of life. The fact that knowing, okay, feeling emotional, that's to be expected, but maybe consider how I wanted to walk through those changes and to not allow my identity then to be rooted and based on that one season of life. And there's a particular verse in the New Testament that really, really helped me. Now, we don't know who the author is, but we know who the audience is. It was written to Jewish Christians in the first century in the book of Hebrews. And it says this, it says, remember your leaders who spoke the word of God to you. So if you think about, for example, these are some of the spiritual leaders we have in our church who we got to hear from today. It says this, consider the outcome of their way of life and imitate their faith. Consider the outcome of their way of life and imitate their faith. And I got thinking about considering my life and how much that faith plays a role in how I manage the changes in my life. For this point, because the Christian faith is anchored in a hope that doesn't change with seasons. And the Christian faith is anchored to something that doesn't bend or break. And it's important to know this, particularly when we're navigating seasonal transitions in our life. And here's my point. Our identities can either come from our season of life, or it can be found in our way of life that flows from our faith. Let me say that again. Your identity can be hitched to a particular season. I'm now single. I'm now the boss. I'm now rich. I'm now a parent. Whatever it might be, your identity can be hitched to a season of life, or it can be found in a way of life that flows from our faith in Jesus. And I found in my life, I remember watching this film when I was younger, and you know, the guy was pouring his heart to this girl, and he said, you complete me, you complete me. I was like, that's a lot of pressure to put on another person, you know? Or like had tempted to say, now I'm a dad, I'm finally complete. And of course, God gives us different relationships and family and experiences in our life that minister and are a blessing and are fruitful to us. But I realized I never became complete because I got married. I never became complete because I became a father. I became complete because I found Jesus. I became complete because my identity wasn't in a season of life that I was going through. No matter if it was a great season or a hard season or successful or anything in between, my identity wasn't something that was immovable. And this is what the next verse in this passage of Hebrews says. It says, because Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and when? Forever. And in all the complicated, messy seasons of our life, the ups and the downs and everything in between, we must have something that our life could be anchored to that doesn't change. And this is the great hope of the Christian faith. Jesus doesn't get dysfunctional on us. He doesn't have to get reelected. He is in control forever. And because of that, you and I don't have to be in control because God is in control. And you can trust Jesus with your life. He is faithful. He's consistent. When people let you down, Jesus doesn't let us down. He has the perfect plan for our lives. He's for you. He's for your kids. He's for your future. He's for the world. He's for our community. Through all the different changes, Jesus is consistent. And therefore, our identity can be unshaken when it is found in Christ. And so I want to leave us with this. I want to pray for you today because perhaps you're in a season of life that is shaking. And it could be very, very normal because you're in a turn, and turns can be complicated, turns can be awkward. And I think what's important is for you to be reminded that there is a God who is for you, who doesn't change, who is consistent, who is the rock of ages. You can trust in him. And when your identity is not based in something that is shaking and can change and evolve, your identity can be based in Jesus Christ. And so maybe you just need to be reminded of that today. Maybe you've forgotten that. Maybe you've never known that. And wherever you're at in that journey, I want us to pray together in this moment for us to affirm again our trust in Jesus Christ, who is the same. Governments change. I was going to say climates change, but I know probably a lot of people, hang on, is that a political statement? You know, everything changes, but Jesus.